You graduate high school and you go to Louisiana State University. You want to do journalism at the time?
I wanted to do journalism at the time, but I thought that, well, here's the thing. I wanted to be like my dad. My dad was an attorney. And so I thought like I would do, I would study like, economics or do some pre-law thing because I was trying to be like my dad, And, but there was this woman who I had seen on television and who looked like my family. She sounded like my family. And when I was growing up, the only role models, the only people on television were, JJ from Good Times and those kinds of things, right? Those kinds of characters. And good for them, right? They were doing what they had to do in the moment, those roles or whatever. But the folks who were like my family, there were few and far between, if any.
Yep.
And so when I saw this woman on television, her name was Jean West. And she looked great, like because my mom would dress to the nines. She's dressed to the nines. She's this beautiful black woman. Her hair was done, and she was just like owning it, right? She was owning it. And I'm like, wow, this woman is great. And she wasn't there very long because she moved on and moved to a better position. And I said, wow, you know what? I want to do that. And I changed from, studying economics, which I was horrible at numbers. I don't know why I did it. And then I started taking journalism classes, and which was natural because my parents had this big Panasonic VHS camera that I used to carry around and pretend that I was a news reporter, and I would do shows in my den, in the family den. And it's funny because we would do like sort of disc shows, right? One of my friends is Mark Ray, who's no longer with us. He's a really funny guy. And my friends and I put together this show called The Mark Ray is a Dick Show for his birthday. And we, put it together and for his birthday, we played it, and it was all the things that we pretend that we hated about Mark Ray, but we actually loved it. We would I'd follow him around campus, LSU with the camera, and we had a badminton class together, or we'd go to his house and we would tape him surreptitiously because my other friend Mike had a camera, and I just sort of edited it and put it together, and we created this show called The Mark Ray is a Dick Show. Or I would do newscasts in my den. And so by the time I started doing the journalism, it just came really, really easy to me.
Well, right, because you ended up going to Brooklyn College.
Yeah. Well, I ended up leaving LSU because my journalism professor told me I would make it.
Right.
Because I had a hard time editing videotape. I've never had to edit videotape in my life, right? It was always an editor, someone who could do it better than me. And so he said, but he was always really nice to the blonde girls or the dark-haired, Southern Belle, beauty queens, but he was never really nice to me. And even though my performance was better, I could, on camera, I was better than them. My writing was good. I believe I'm an excellent writer, if I must say so myself. But he would never give me credit for any of that. He wouldn't give me any shine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I said, and then he said, I remember when I went to turn in for one of the exams, we were in this sort of editing suites, and he said, you're just not gonna, you should do something more suited to what you should do. And I looked at him like, what? I'm like, these people, have you seen this girl that you are kissing up to every day and who's in your office? She's not great.
Yeah.
I left.
Yeah. Look what ultimately happened.
Yeah, I left. And I moved to New York with, I know it's the whole, it sounds like a cliche story, $200 in my pocket, all of the belongings that I could fit in my 1987 Jeep Wrangler. And I moved in with a friend in Jersey City, stayed with them for a while, took a job at Macy's for holiday relief, Herald Square, and then eventually moved into a sublet apartment, the back room of someone's apartment. I forgot the guy's name, in Astoria, Queens. Then I met my boyfriend, and we moved into an apartment in Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens in Brooklyn. We lived together for a while, and we broke up, and that's when I told my mom.
Okay, so you graduate from Brooklyn College, with a major in broadcast journalism.
Yep.
And then you started getting jobs.
Yes.
You were a news anchor for WBRC in Birmingham, Alabama.
Yep.
WCAU in Philadelphia.
Yep.
Some Fox affiliates in St. Louis. Then you were in New York.
They were all Fox affiliates.
So these are all, so you were just
So
jumping
I was
around.
working, so I took a job at, like I was trying to make ends meet. It was tough back then because I didn't have my degree and people were telling me that oh, you don't need your degree in this business, whatever. And I took a job, but the first job I took was at Channel 5 on the Upper East Side, WMYW, as a trainee in the newsroom, $5 an hour. and so that was like a 6-month traineeship, how to be in news, how, what to do in a newsroom. It sort of trained you. And so that was a 6-month gig. And then I was so good that they hired me as a freelance production assistant. And so I went from $5 an hour to like, $6 or $7, and I thought I was rich, right? But I still could barely afford my $300 and whatever dollar apartment sublet. And so, it was freelance, so I didn't get to work all the time, right? So I really struggled. So I took a job as an office manager for a sign company called Jewel Light. I don't think it's there anymore. And I remember one day I was in the front of office or whatever of this sign, and this was down near the World Trade Center, and the sun hit it like the shadow across the sign, and I read it and it said Jew Elite. And I turned to the owner and I said, that sign says Jew Elite? And he said, yeah.
I meant it that way.
I meant it that way. And I was like, okay, I get it. But then eventually I started getting enough hours at Channel 5, and so I got to leave my job as an office manager, which I hated anyways. And I started working I became from a trainee to a production assistant to a desk assistant to an assignment editor, satellite feeds coordinator, field producer, writer. I could do every single job in the newsroom by the time. And I was working either part-time or full. I mean, I was going to school either part-time or full-time, depending on my schedule at work.
By 2002, you won a Edward R. Murrow Award for coverage around the DC sniper.
The snipers, yeah.
I remember when that happened and they actually released a picture of him, like everyone was shocked that he was black.
Yeah.
It seemed like this was like a white thing to do.
Yeah. But do you remember that time?
I do.
By that time I had gotten to the network. I was at NBC News by that time. I had gone from, New York WNYW to Birmingham, Alabama, to St. Louis, to Philadelphia. And it was my first network gig at NBC News. And I was doing reports for NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw. And I just remember, I would file my reports. And so it was kind of in a silo, so it wasn't a big deal. But the night that they caught the snipers, it was a huge special show. This is NBC News special coverage, Tom Brokaw. And I was one of the correspondents that had to cover it live. And I had never been live with Tom. Maybe, I don't know if I had never been live with Tom. I had reports in the show, but I'd never been live with him. And so, he's like, and now the snipers, let's go to Don Lemon. And I'm like, oh, my heart is going. And I go, good evening, Tom, blah, 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 toss to my story, and then I come out, blah, 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 back to you, Tom. He asks a question, I answer the question, and then that was it. And I thought I was going to pass out because, my mom was like, I just saw you on the nightly news. It was great. But that was a big deal, and we won, an Edward R. Murrow for that.
And then you started working for WMAQ TV in Chicago, and you won 3 Emmys.
Yes. But I left NBC News because WMAQ wanted, their anchor had cancer, and they needed someone, they needed a number 2 and someone who would eventually take over for the anchor, for the main anchor. So they asked me to come. I'm like, I got this network gig, and they're like, we'll make it worth your while. So I left NBC News and went to WMAQ in Chicago and started working there as the 5 o'clock anchor. And, with the intent from the station that I was going to eventually become the main anchor there. But his name was Warner Saunders, great guy. think Warner's gone now. He's passed. But Warner wasn't going anywhere. So it's like after 3 years, I'm like, Warner's not going anywhere. Why am I still sitting here? And so I left.
Right. Then by 2006, you joined CNN.
Yes.
Is this what you had been aiming for the whole time?
Yes, I had been aiming for. I mean, look, I had my cushy gig at NBC News, and the thing what they said, if it doesn't work out in Chicago, you can come back to NBC News. But then that's when they started downsizing, right? And NBC News was going through. I think GE they had sold it to whatever, maybe GE or Comcast, I forget. So they were having issues, and I was just like, I'm not going to go back and deal with that. I'll just go work for CNN. And so I went to work for CNN, but it was never my ambition to go to work for CNN. As a matter of fact, when I was coming up, if you were in broadcast, like if you were at a network, people at the network looked down their nose at people who were in cable. They just thought the people in cable were second fiddle, and they were like, oh, you're
right. Because, I mean, the regular channels had a bigger audience.
They had a bigger audience. But then eventually, over time,
it went the other way.
It went the other way. Not necessarily a bigger audience, but cable became more relevant. All the conversations were happening on cable. People could tune in all day long, and especially when I was in, eventually got to prime time, that's where everybody started watching, because they were like, well, I don't know what Don Lemon's going to say tonight. Let me tune in, So, but not just the relevance, not just through me, but this is Barack Obama, and this was George Bush. It was the war. It was Donald Trump came along and all that. So people just started having those conversations on cable, and cable became much more relevant than broadcast news at that time.
Well, you're at CNN and you're working your way up the system there. And then in 2011, you publicly came out as gay. Mm-hmm. Now, you'd already told your family and friends about it, but now you publicly came out. Was it on the air or?
Well, kind of on the air. Two things. So I came out in several ways. And I don't mean came out as gay. I came out as a victim or a survivor of sexual abuse. I just unwittingly, I don't know what happened, but I just said it on the air. There was, why can't I remember his name? But there was a pastor down in Atlanta who had been accused of sexually abusing some of the members of his flock. And I can't remember his name. But anyways, it'll come to me. And then I had some of the members of his congregation on the air to talk about it. And I'm having a conversation, and this is when I was a weekend anchor, and they're talking to me, and they go, oh, Bishop, it was Bishop somebody. And they said, Bishop is not this, he's not that, you never would have thought. And I said, people don't wear M on their forehead or on their chest for a molester, or an A for abuser. I said, and it's usually the person you least expect. And I said, I know from experience because it happened to me. And in that moment, the three members I was talking to they were like, and they just got quiet. And I'm like, well, what is the big deal? And then the show ended, and then my boss called, and then another boss called, and then my mom called, and she's like, I almost fell out of my chair, and because I hadn't told her. And she said, I couldn't believe it, and and so that I came out with that, and that was empowering. Some people were, concerned at the network about why I did it, and they were just really nervous about it. I'm like, why are you so nervous? It's real. And so I think that's when I started gaining, I think, some autonomy, and I became more self-possessed about who I was and the power that I had and the influence that I could have in this platform just by being honest and getting people and discussing things that people did not discuss and were afraid to discuss. And that's what the medium, I believe, should be used for, because so many people were keeping those secrets, and it was unhealthy. And as long as you kept that, as long as we were keeping those secrets, that would allow for more people to be abused. And so I realized that in that moment. And I thought that, oh my God, I'm in trouble. People aren't going to, but the outpouring and the support I got was overwhelming. So after that, someone approached me, a publisher, and said, I think you have a book in you. You should write a book. Well, would you do it? And we'll help you, whatever. And we'll just, we'll split the royalties, blah, blah, blah. We'll do all that. And I was like, I didn't know. I'm like, okay, fine. So I wrote a book about my my story, my journeys in journalism, and my travails and journeys in journalism. And I got to the point in the book, because it was, a memoir about my life, about why I moved to New York. And I moved to New York to escape racism and the homophobia of Louisiana and to be myself. And I said, I have to have the same rules for me as I have for everybody else on the air. And so if I'm going to write it, then I have to be honest. And I said, I moved to New York to come out because I was gay and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And it was only like a page or two in this book. And I struggled with it. I was just so afraid. I'm like, I'm going to lose my livelihood, but I'm going to do it. I got to do it. And the New York Times wrote about it, and then boom, that was it.
I mean, were you the first person in the national media space to come out as gay?
Rachel Maddow was on the air, but she did not have the success that she has now. She did not have the profile that she had.
Right. She's a woman, though.
She's a woman.
So there's a slightly different stigma.
Yes, you're right about that. And then, I don't know if you remember Thomas Roberts. Thomas Roberts worked for HLN, Headline News. He was an anchor there, and Thomas came out. And, Thomas is a white guy, slightly different for a black man, as you know. Even more of a stigma. And I think that was it. And so there was no one else out. And I'm like, you know what, I'm going to do it. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll just go do something else.
And the sun still rose the next day. Life went on.
I know. Look, it's easy to say that, especially now, if you're looking at it through the modern lens of 2024, 2023, 2024, 2025 lens. Mm-hmm. It's easy to say the sun came up and it's, right, you can make light of it. But in 2011, it was serious shit and it was scary and there was nobody else. There was no roadmap for me.
Yeah.
There were no other pioneers. I mentioned Thomas. Thomas had a different profile than I did. He worked for HLN, whatever, which was a different sort of thing. I worked for the mothership and was one of their, premier anchors. And in a very rarefied place, like the higher you get, right, the air gets thinner. And so I was up there and I'm like, here I am at this perch and I'm going to come out and I don't know what people are going to say. I'm going to lose my livelihood. I'm going to get a lot of criticism, but I have to be honest with myself if I'm going to be a real journalist and a real person. And so I did it, but it was scary. And, I feel like I helped some folks.
Yeah, I'm sure you were viewed as a hero in your community.
A hero to some,
yeah.
And, to others, it was like, why did he have to do that? Why does he have to tell personal business and nobody cares about who he sleeps with? And I'm like, this is not about who I sleep with.
Right.
It was scary, yes.
Well, around this time, around 2012, you said you had a situation with Jonah Hill when you met him, and you said that he was extremely rude and treated you like the help.
Well, I didn't say I had a situation with him. I just remember being nice to him, and he was rude. That's it. And treated me like the help. Like, you treat people at whatever, but, that's so old. And, I think I've seen Jonah since then, and it's totally fine. But that's like old.
Okay.
News. But I didn't mean anything racial about that. That was nothing about race.
Okay.
That had nothing to do. I think the movie The Help was out then.
Right.
Yeah, but that was the beginnings of like Twitter and, and people made it out to be more than it was. I don't really care. Jonah's, I'm sure, a good guy or whatever, but that's God from like, what, 2012?
Yeah.
Yeah, old news.
12 years ago. Okay, so you're at CNN and you start to work your way up the ladder to the point where you get your own show, The 11th Hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first it was the Don Lemon show. They tried that for something. I believe it was a Don Lemon show. And then it was the 11th Hour. It's the original 11th Hour because now there's an 11th Hour on MSNBC.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. But now you have your own show.
Yes.
How did that feel to actually get to that point?
Well, that was good. That was a pilot. So they were piloting a show called the 11th Hour that I came on at 11. And I think after me was a show, I forget what it was. It was Sonny Hostin, who's now a co-host of The View, and Mark Garagos, the famed attorney. And so I would do the 11th Hour for 30 minutes. This was the plan. This was a pilot that they wanted. And then Sonny and Mark would do their legal show after that. And almost as soon as that happened, MH370 happened, the plane. So I think I got 1 episode of that show, maybe 2, I can't remember, and then it was over.
Okay. During this time, you had some interesting interviews.
Yeah.
You interviewed Mike Tyson.
Yes, but listen, you're missing a whole part of the story.
Okay.
That show was over, and the 11th hour was over because of the plane. And so nobody wanted to cover the plane. They thought they were too good for the plane.
This is the Malaysia flight.
This is a Malaysia flight. They thought they were too good for the plane. And I was like, I'll cover it. Now, if I hadn't said I'll cover it, I don't think I'd be sitting here today. You wouldn't care because I would be some also ran, doing whatever. So I said, I'll cover it. And then I covered it and I went into it and I'm like, I'm going to do it. If you want me to cover this plane, I'm going to cover this plane. And so MH370 happened. Mm-hmm. And after, that wound down, I saw my boss, Jeff Zucker, in the elevator. We were riding between, I think it was like 2 floors, like maybe 5 to 7. And I said, I know the plane thing is over. I said, but you know what? We can make this show work without the plane. And he goes, sure. He goes, what are you going to do? I'm like, I said, we'll just talk about the big stories of the day, the water cooler stories, and that's it. We'll just dig deep into them. But this show can work without the plane.
Okay.
He said, okay.
That was the Don Lemon Show?
That was CNN Tonight, which eventually became CNN Tonight with Don Lemon, which eventually became Don Lemon Tonight.